work as an independent trainer, speaker, consultant, assessor, workplace assessor. I've done coaching. I ran a mentoring project, autism mentoring project for about 7 years. I've written six books on autism, including one on women and girls. I'm also autistic myself. I have 2 autistic children, an autistic partner, many in denial family members who are very likely to be on the autistic spectrum. So a whole bunch of experience in personal and professional kind of bits and pieces, really. So what we're going to talk about today is females. And I like to kind of, and I'm sure most of you are kind of aware that there's been this fairly newish idea about females and autism. But I think it's important to note that it's not a definitive gender split. What we're going to talk about today is not really female autism. It's just a different way that autism might present itself, and that can present itself in any gender at all. And equally, we can see females who are much more typically traditional in terms of their autism profile. So I think that's important, because I think sometimes we kind of go, this is women, this is men, and it's not really like that. It's a little bit more kind of spread and different than that. So that's the first thing to kind of get out of the way. What I want to do today is, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience. I'm a late diagnosed autistic person, and then we're going to talk about what happened, why the girls got missed for decades and decades, what autism looks like in girls, some of the particular things that seem to be very particular in this type of profile that comes up as a particular issue, why the girls are getting missed through diagnosis still, and what we can do about that, what we need to be flagging up to clinicians and teachers and schools and everybody about what this autism really looks like, and then we'll think about some kind of ideas of how we support people, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end, if that's okay. So I think, first of all, let me tell you about myself. This is me. I'm the one on the right, if you're not sure. I was diagnosed in my 40s. I know I don't look that old, but thank you. By the time I had my diagnosis, this sounds a bit weird, I had all of these things. I had a master's degree in autism. I'd already written 6 books. I'd delivered more than 1,000 training sessions, 7 years managing his mentoring project. Everybody else in my family was suspected or diagnosed. And actually, my partner and I, Keith, who sat at the front here, we wrote a book together about our relationship a long, long time ago, where I definitively said, I am not autistic. I'm a bit odd. I'm very clearly a bit neurodiverse. I have lots of anxiety. I have lots of odd things, but I'm definitely not autistic. Because, like many professional people, all of my learning about autism had told me that autism looks like Keith and Sheldon and Rain Man, and they all kind of looked the same to me, and I didn't look like that. I had far too many experiences, was far too proactive, it used to get into far too much trouble to be autistic, because what we always learned was that autistic people said no to everything. So their lives were quite small, they were quite sheltered, they just avoided change like the plague, were loners, they hid themselves away, and that wasn't me. So I couldn't possibly be autistic. As the years have gone by, and actually it's been meeting more and more autistic women professionally, that I started to think, hang on a minute, that is absolutely exactly my life story. And over many, many years, and with this general kind of knowledge that's come forward, I realised actually that I was autistic too, and went and got a diagnosis. So the reason it took me so long, despite working in this field for so long, is because I'm female, because I'm intelligent, and because I'm a people watcher and a studier of people, and I'm a damn good masker. So this person you see in front of you today is having a nice time, and it's all going to be good. The person that will be sitting in the car on the way home might be crying, will likely be completely non-verbal, and will be incapable of doing anything else for the rest of the day. So it's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde kind of life, this sort of stuff. We go out, we do our thing, and then we go away, and everything kind of comes crashing down. It can be hard to believe, but I'm sure many of you in here, that's the picture you see with some of your girls, is that they are super cheerful on the face of it. Nobody's going to see that we're struggling and working really hard. Behind closed doors, poof, shut down, meltdown, everything kind of changes. So that's why I've kind of got so far. And the ability to logically systemize people is a huge benefit and a huge skill. What I see a lot is that there are huge numbers of older autistic women coming for diagnosis now because we're knackered. You get to this age in your 40s and you just go, you know what, I can't be doing this anymore. I try, there's some recognition in the room. I think most 40-year-old women are knackered, but autistic ones particularly knackered. You're trying to fit in, you're trying to be liked, you're trying to get it right, and whatever you do, it just doesn't quite work. And in the end, you just go, sod it, I'm just going to be me. And there's a huge liberation in that diagnosis. The amount of people that come for assessment and they say, I am so relieved to be autistic. And we have this idea in the past that an autism diagnosis was a terrible tragedy, but we have this generation of older women that are just going, please tell me I'm autistic. It explains everything in my life, and introduces them to a whole kind of other community of other people. One of the even bigger numbers of people coming forward are mothers of autistic children. Because again, in the past, we knew this stuff was genetic, and we used to say, so, who else in the family is a bit peculiar? Must be dad. And mum got off the hook. And now we're starting to go, well, maybe it's mum as well. Who knows? We know that autistic people have a tendency to be in relationships with other autistic people. So if you always thought it was just dad, sorry, love, it might well be you as well. It's definitely one of you, or potentially kind of both of you, because everybody's kind of looking for this male presentation. So I was apparently a gifted child, very high IQ. I could speak full sentences at 9 months old, which sounds like some kind of weird horror film of some baby kind of spouting stuff out of its mouth, or like Stewie from Family Guy. I was considered to be shy and neurotic. I had a lot of tics. I was quite a shy, quite odd little child in a world of my own. Obviously, we're talking here 1970s, so no Asperger's syndrome, no version of autism that covered women, no version of autism that covered people with no learning disability. It just wasn't there. There was no way anybody was going to think there was anything wrong with me. I was not a particular numbers person, and again, traditionally, we always think that autism is about numbers. I was a words person and still am. I write books, I write poetry, I write novels. I love words, I read signposts, I learn languages. Words are absolutely the thing that I notice in the world. I'm fascinated and interested by all of those. I was a mimic. I can do impressions of all farm animals, bad impressions of virtually every accent in the world. I take off people, and I always did. And it made me a clown. And being a clown is a very effective way to get away with being not very great socially. If you can make people laugh, at least for a short time, you have some superficial buy-in and some superficial status. You don't get much beyond that, and that's always certainly been a problem for me, that I can come in and make people laugh, but then I don't really have much else to say. I don't know what to do with myself. I become very awkward and kind of have to leave. So the depths of friendships aren't really there, but it buys you in a little bit when you're at school. You're funny, you can come along, you're okay. And if you're funny, you get away with quite a lot of stuff. Your verbal ability with words masks a huge amount, and this is something that we see in the girls. Their ability to speak, be articulate, be vocal, fools everybody into thinking that underneath that there is a really strong, developed, sophisticated social network, and often it's not. It's just a whole series of scripts or learnt behaviours or mimicking and those sorts of things. So we need to watch out for the chatty girls into thinking that they're perfectly fine. Here I am sitting with my friend Amanda, who's gently touching me on the arm. Amanda and I lost touch for about 30 odd years or so, found each other on Facebook, found out that we lived 200 metres away from each other. Anybody like to guess what Amanda does for a living? She is head of an autism unit. So Amanda found her vocation looking after me at Brownie Camp in very, very early life. She doesn't seem to be very grateful. She doesn't actually know that I've been showing this picture around the world for the last 10 years either, so she probably wouldn't be very happy about that either. So as a child, I was a very organised kind of kid. I was definitely a tomboy again. This is something that we'll see in the girls. I liked models, I liked cars, I liked making things out of wood, I liked organising stuff. I'm very frustrated that I could never work out a perfect system for Lego. Do you do it by colour? Do you do it by size? Do you do it by function? That kind of stuff made my head hurt as a child. How do you organise Lego efficiently? I used to organise the quality street at Christmas. They all had to have an equal number of every colour, and if anyone took one, I would have to eat one of all of the others to equal them all up. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. Was clearly clever, had no concept of how to learn, always considered lazy. If you get C's and B's when people think you're capable of getting A's, nobody would ever consider that might be some kind of learning difficulty. You're just lazy. That's all that happens. You clearly are capable, but you're just not doing the work. Whereas for me, I just didn't know what else to do. I could get a B or a C with no effort whatsoever. What was the point of an A? I didn't really understand why or what the purpose of learning was. I organised all of my family's finances, I did all of the family shopping, I had a box set of campsite toilets rated by how long you got for your 10p in the shower. That was my idea of fun. My birthday parties were spent with 10 very elderly people all playing cards and cribbage when everybody else was going to McDonald's. Again, that was my choice and my idea of fun. So just a slightly odd child. Nobody would have thought there was anything problematic about me. I was doing all right. I was just a slightly lazy, odd child. And then the teenage years kick in, and again, we shall hear that this is a major problem for a lot of our young women. That's me at the age of 19, looking terrified at a baby, probably realising that it's my baby, and I've now got to look after it. That baby is now 31 and taller than me, so I can't beat her in a fight anymore, which is difficult. She also has grandchildren who are clearly a little neurodiverse, although not yet diagnosed. We might talk about them later. So teenage years, highly vulnerable, very much wanted to fit in, my obsessions were with boys and with being liked and with fitting in. I was a self-harmer. I used to cut the names of boys' names into my arms. Very poor judgment, and if you're quite bright academically, this really confuses people. What is the matter with you? You are so smart and yet you're so stupid. I would put myself into dangerous situations, took everything at face value, couldn't read hidden agendas, and rather than into our traditional understanding, this idea of not being able to read hidden agendas kind of ends up making you not get involved in things. For a lot of girls, it means that you end up saying yes to things because you can't work out that you shouldn't. So there's a kind of proactiveness that we often see in females that you tend not quite so much to see in males. More problems, more difficulties, more issues. There was a piece of research that I read which really made massive sense. It was a woman, she's called Vingarden Kremers, a Dutch woman who works in a substance misuse clinic in Holland, and she was seeing all these people coming through with substance misuse issues and then realising that actually these people were likely to be on the autistic spectrum. So she started screening them for autism, and she noticed this really clear difference between the males and the females, and what she concluded was that the women were having more life events. So whereas the men would have one job, one house, one relationship, still be living at home, whatever, the women were having multiple jobs, multiple relationships, multiple crises, because this inability to predict consequences, this inability to read hidden agendas, rather than stopping you do things, it was actually making you go, I could do that, I could do that. And because the judgments that you were making weren't contextually great, those judgments weren't panning out. So they were bad job choices, bad relationship choices, bad life choices, and they kept failing. So it ended up with this huge list of women having all these experiences and the men having very short experiences, because that same cognitive process was actually making them resist kind of having those experiences. And that's really borne out in my experience and relationship. I've had probably 35 to 40 jobs. I've had multiple relationships, multiple house moves, multiple crises and chaos in my life. My partner Keith, we're virtually the same age. He's had 2 jobs in the whole of his life. Very small number of relationships. First relationship was very late, in his 30s. Completely different experience, and yet cognitively our diagnosis is identical. So interestingly, there's something about this female type profile that kind of often just wants to go and do stuff, but doesn't necessarily have the judgment to go, actually, is that the best thing for me? Do I have the ability? Is this going to pan out? So often, and this is something that I've met so many women, that it's exactly the same. Our lives are way too chaotic for anyone to initially believe that that could be autistic behaviour, but it absolutely fits, and it absolutely is. So copying people, mimicking people, watching people, again, we'll learn a bit more about this as we go along. My dad used to say I was all O-levels and no common sense, and that's it. It's this academic ability which is about being linear, it's about being retaining knowledge, having memory, but then the social world is abstract. You're guessing all of the time. You've got to read people, read situations, work stuff out. And that kind of very clear cut, I think, is very, very definitive in autism, being really good at making sense of things, but really not so great at just winging it and trying to kind of work out what's going on a much more general sort of level. So I didn't do terribly well academically, got a few O-levels, went to live in a squat, was drinking large amounts of alcohol by the time I was 16, 17, very vulnerable, got into some very unpleasant, difficult situations with people that I thought were okay, but I couldn't read them at all, and that's continued pretty much all my life. Everything was exhausting. Going to the shops is exhausting. Being out in town by myself makes me dizzy. Just this weird sense of all these years thinking, why can't I just get on with life in the same way that other people do? Because I'm bright enough. What on earth is wrong with me? But there was nothing kind of definitively kind of obvious. So the conclusion that I made, as many people make, is I'm just crap at life. That's it. That's the only conclusion I can have, is I'm just lazy. I just can't kind of get this stuff together. Can't make friends. The light hurts me. The aircon hurts me. Everything hurts me. Make no sense of that whatsoever. And then the diagnosis just explains everything. As I said, a lot of these middle-aged kind of women are coming forward now and going, that's it. That absolutely explains my existence. And the autistic life and the diagnosis, and sometimes people say, well, why bother diagnosing when somebody's 40 or 50 or 80 or 90? My experience of meeting and working with people who are having that diagnosis is just this weight that is lifted off someone that says, none of this is your fault. You process things differently than the majority of people that live in the world that you live in. It's not your fault. You're doing really well, actually, given the tools that you've been given, this very social, changeable, sensory world that you live in. That's autism. People change sensory. That's it. And that's the world we live in, is a world that a lot of autistic people just find a constant battle, because cognitively we're kind of struggling to make sense of all of those kind of things. And what the diagnosis allows people to do, and what it allowed me to do, was to construct a kind of framework for a more autistic life. And that is about thinking about, what am I good at? What's my capacity? Not comparing myself to other people and saying, well, they do that, therefore I should be able to. One of the big things I think that's a real struggle to get over is genuinely saying, I can't do that in the same way that other people do. If I do a full day of work, I need a day off afterwards. I cannot get back in and do that all over again. Despite being bright, despite being able, I just don't have the capacity to do that. And that's a hugely valuable thing to be able to say, that you manage all of your life by looking after your well-being and finding ways to meet the obligations, which we all have, whether it's jobs or kids or families or whatever, but by trying to manage your own well-being at the same time. So having a good person in my life, my Keith is absolutely it. He's the one person that I can be entirely myself with, and that's extraordinarily important when you're constantly being something else for everyone else. I live in the middle of nowhere in Wales. There's an awful lot of people in the southeast of England. There's not many in Wales. And I look out of my window at a mountain, and everything is just very, very empty and very, very quiet. And that's wonderful. I'm very lucky. I can work kind of when I want to and how I want to, and to be able to do the things that I am relatively good at and to minimize the things that I'm less good at. So I don't answer emails, I don't answer the phone, I don't answer the door, anything kind of hassly, then Keith is like I am Beyonce of the autism world. I have people that do things for me because I'm too precious to do them myself. But it's just understanding that how do I give my all to do the stuff I can do, but then I need to find other people to kind of manage the stuff that genuinely, absolutely just destroys me entirely. I have loads of routines, I have loads of schedules, there's a huge bunch of scaffolding that makes me look a lot more flexible than I actually am. A huge amount of time spent staring at schedules, rewriting lists, planning exactly how long things are going to take. I always bring my food with me wherever I go. I don't like, because it means I don't have to go into a canteen, I don't have to choose, I don't have to go to a shop, I don't have to lose my break. So I eat the same food over and over again for days and days and weeks on end sometimes. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that nobody sees. And then you come out into the world and people go, well, you don't look very autistic, do you? And you think, if only you knew that actually, and that's very much the case for a lot of the girls and women. We try very hard not to look autistic. And unfortunately, sometimes that's our biggest problem, is that nobody really takes us seriously because we're too good at it. Rather than saying kind of, well done, you've hidden that really well, people therefore assume that it's kind of less a problem than perhaps it might be. So, we're going to talk a little bit about why the girls didn't get picked up in the first place. I'm sorry this is so tiny for some of you who are not particularly kind of near a screen. When I wrote my book about women, I did a literature review of every piece of gender-focused research in autism to see whether there were how much there was there. And I think at the time, there's probably a few more now, but at the time there was probably about 12 research papers. I couldn't tell you how many research papers there are in autism generally, but I think it's probably in the millions. And there were about 12 that actually said, are autistic males different than autistic females? That was pretty much it, really. So it kind of appears that so what people were comparing was autistic people versus non-autistic people. Nobody ever kind of thought, does gender make any difference in this whatsoever? Not at all. Which is kind of weird, because in lots of areas of life we do think that gender changes things in the way that people process things or behave or whatever. So what seems to be the case is that in the very early understanding of modern autism, Kanner, Asperger, they only found boys. And therefore, the diagnostic profiles and criteria for autism were written around male behaviour, and therefore nobody found any girls because they weren't looking for any girls. And if the girls didn't quite fit the male behaviour, then they didn't get the diagnosis. And therefore, when you tried to do research and you looked for a sample, all you could find was boys, because you hadn't diagnosed any girls, because the criteria didn't pick up girls. And so we've ended up with this weird self-fulfilling prophecy that every clinician and professional, myself included, when you go to autism training, they tell you there are 4 times, 5 times, 10 times as many males with autism than there are women. And that's what you learn. And so when people come into your clinic and it's a girl, autism's not on the radar. You're not looking for autism because you're told that autism isn't in girls. So then when you come to do your research, you still haven't got any girls to study. So nothing ever changes. And this is what's been going on for the last sort of 50, 60 years or so, this kind of ridiculous kind of perpetual thing. So these are some of the bits that came out of the research, the literature review that I did, just a few kind of bits and pieces. We now think, it says there 2 to 5 male to female ratio. Some people think it's closer to 1 to 1, that actually there could be as many autistic females as there are autistic males. That's hugely shrunk within the last 10 years or so. And if you're in a setting where you have far, far more boys than you do girls on the autistic spectrum, then you need to be looking for the girls, because they are in your setting. It's just that you haven't found them yet, and you may well be labelling them as slightly kind of different things. The papers suggested that girls look less autistic because they focus quite often on social learning. They are copying, they are mimicking, they are trying to hide, and therefore you are not necessarily seeing the obvious signs of what we anticipate to be a sign of autism. The girls are diagnosed later than the boys. In this particular study, the boys were diagnosed at 5 and the girls are diagnosed at 8. And this is something that I see across the board, that there is a tendency to assume that girls have psychiatric and psychological illnesses rather than neurological illnesses. So the girls, before they get diagnosed with autism, are quite often diagnosed with social anxiety, OCD, borderline personality, bipolar, social phobia, you name it, anorexia, when actually it might be autism. And that's so common. Nearly all of the women I meet and the girls that I meet have had anxiety diagnosis or some other mental health diagnosis first, and people do not consider autism at all. It's definitely that they have a mental or a psychiatric kind of illness. Often in girls that are not don't have learning disabilities, don't have verbal speech delays of any sort, you're often seeing very early speech and very precocious speech. They do not shut up. They talk and they talk and they talk all of the time. And as I said, that can mask social and communication difficulties because it sounds like you're social. It sounds like you want to interact. If you listen to some of those conversations, you realise they're a bit monologue-y, they're a bit scripted, they're a bit one-sided. It's not quite what we might kind of expect from a child of that age. There's some work that suggests that the profile of all autistic people in terms of their hormone profile, androgens and testosterone, is more androgynous. So rather than being more masculine or more feminine, there's a sense that possibly autistic people are just somewhere in the middle in terms of their kind of gender identity, in terms of their presentation, in terms of the clothing they choose, the way they kind of think about the world. And certainly we've talked about tomboy girls for a really long time, and a kind of more masculine feature, a more male what's it called, extreme male brain theory of Simon Baron-Cohen, which upsets a lot of people. But the reality seems to be just sort of neither male nor female in very traditional terms, but maybe just a kind of a more androgynous profile. Also quite, and we'll be talking more about this afternoon, around gender identity, that there appear to be more people who are recognised as non-binary in terms of their gender on the autistic spectrum than in the general population. So people who recognise as gender fluid, gender neutral, their sexuality is not necessarily heterosexual, so higher numbers of gay population, asexual, polyamorous, pansexual, you name it. Autistic people seem to have a much kind of broader sense of what it means to be themselves and also to be with other people. It doesn't seem to be quite so defined and so clear as we would generally expect in the general population. Some jolly stuff about polycystic ovary syndrome, menstruation, infertility, migraines, hormones, excess facial hair that comes with female autism. As if autism isn't bad enough, you've now got a beard to go with it as well, which is really joyful. They also have suggested in another paper that the girls have more social difficulties and are less rigid than the boys, although I don't know if that's strictly true, and we'll talk about some of the kind of intense interest in girls in a minute or two. There's also a suggestion that the girls are better when they are younger at socialising, but the boys kind of overtake in teenage years. And it's not that the boys get better or the girls get worse, it's that the female social world changes so much in teenage years, whereas the social world of males perhaps doesn't change quite so much. It's still around objects, activities, stuff, whereas female interaction in teenage years becomes much more nuanced. It's all about, do I like you? Are your eyebrows right? Have you looked at me funny? Did you like my picture of my shoes that I put on Facebook quickly enough? It's just like, whoa, highly, highly complex stuff. And our autistic young woman just still wants to play with her rabbit and Pokemon and kind of do her thing. Whereas all of a sudden there's this very kind of personality-based sense of very complex rules that come on that she can't kind of keep up with. It's also considered that the boys have a tendency to want to be alone and that the girls are quite clingy. So the girls often talk about wanting or needing someone, whether it's their mum, whether it's a friend, whether it's someone else in their life. They don't like to be alone because if somebody's with them, then that person can look after them. Whereas often it has been seen that the boys were kind of a bit more loners, quite happy doing their own thing, a bit more self-contained. The girls are frightened of being on their own because they don't have anyone to speak for them, to do something for them, and manage life for them. And as I said, a large number of adult women seeking diagnosis, and a lot of those women are having quite negative experiences, going to their GP who may not understand and are just saying, you can't possibly be autistic, you have children, you have a job, you're making eye contact, you're having a reciprocal conversation, that's it. So a lot of people are having to go private to get those diagnoses. And one of the highest, there's some pretty nasty stuff around suicide and autism, and the highest group for suicide are autistic women. They're higher than men, they're higher than autistic men. Which is kind of scary stuff, and is something we don't know a huge amount about, but are kind of getting there a little bit. So, why do these girls get missed? The criteria apply. Some people say, well, we need a new set of diagnostic criteria to diagnose girls, but we don't. We just need to diagnose better and broaden our understanding of what these criteria mean and how they might present themselves. There's some of you might be familiar with the ADOS, which is a kind of standard clinical tool for diagnosis. The big expert in this field is a lady called Dr. Judith Gould, and she recommends that the ADOS should not really be used for girls and definitely should not be used as a sole tool for picking up girls, because it very much relies on the behaviours being seen in the room and being given a point for. And as we are learning, these girls will often perform very beautifully in front of somebody and will get 0 and will not get the diagnosis at all. And I've seen this time and time and time again. And there are certain things in the ADOS. So the other day I read a clinical report from a girl who had scored, I think you have to score 7 in the ADOS possibly, and she'd scored 6 and didn't get the diagnosis. She was an absolutely definitively obvious autistic girl, but by no means. And the reason that she didn't get the last point to get the diagnosis was because no sensory features were noted within the appointment interview. So that kind of suggests that you have to be experiencing whatever sensory thing are your thing at that particular time. So when I spoke to her, she was wearing a pair of fluffy earmuffs, this kind of big, which she never takes off unless she's in the bath or asleep. And she was wearing a long dress. She can't wear jeans, she can't wear trousers, she wears leggings, she wears this long dress. There's some huge amounts of stuff around food, around texture and all of that kind of stuff, but the ADOS doesn't ask that. So unless you as a clinician are actually asking those very specific questions, where was the opportunity for this sensory stuff to come up? It wouldn't have come up. You don't just talk about this stuff unless somebody asks you, and she wasn't eating anything or bothered by anything, so why would you talk about it? So it's really important that we give as much information as we can to make sure that if people are using tools which are not entirely adequate, that the whole picture is kind of obviously there, because obviously without a diagnosis, there's a whole load of support that she's never not going to be able to have. So this is the kind of criteria for diagnosis, and how does it apply to girls? Why are the girls missed? The girls are missed because they copy, they talk, they mimic, they mask. Some people talk about watching. They always tend to copy the most popular girls in the school, because there's no good copying the weirdo because you're already one of them. Let's aim really high. Let's find the most glamorous, feminine, social, hair flicky, made-up kind of girl we can find, supermodel status, and let's aspire to be her, because we're black and white and we're perfectionists, and that's where we're aiming at. So it's like the rest of us, trying to be marathon runners and supermodels and Olympians or something or other. Likely to fail, to be fair. Some people say, I would watch this girl, I would watch the way that she picked up her cup, I would watch the way that she laughed, I would watch the way that she moved her hair, and I would go home and I would practice. Sounds a little bit weird kind of stalky kind of stuff. But it was almost this sense of, I know that I am not acceptable as I am, therefore if I take pieces of people who are socially acceptable, then maybe I will be better and I will be liked more if I do that. Sometimes this comes from mothers. I met a mother, a very glamorous lady, who had a daughter who was very kind of hair down the middle and just hoodie, jeans, hands in pockets, and the mother was clearly very disappointed by the child that she had produced, and she said, well, if only she could put some makeup on and wear some heels, then she could make the right sort of friends. And I was like, really? Do you really think that's going to last 5 minutes? There is nothing that she has in common with these girls. She's not interested in makeup and hair and fashion. We need to find her own friends of people that actually appreciate who she is. You know, we could all stick a dress on and high heels and totter about for a bit. It's not going to make us more social or more easily integrated into these very popular kind of social groups. So there's a huge amount of that. Some people don't know they do it. Some people are very conscious that they do it. They're picking up accents, picking up voices, but usually of the high, very social, popular kind of girls. Often considered shy. If it was a boy, we might call that withdrawn and we might worry about it. If it's a girl, we might just call it shy and not really worry about it. She's quiet, she's pleasant enough, she's helpful. We don't need to worry about her. What we know is that sometimes the picture at school and the picture at home are a very, very different picture, and that schools sometimes struggle to believe the family that at home there's an aggressive, a violent, a distressed child, and at school there's this absolute picture of calmness and picture of helpfulness. We must believe each other. The schools and the parents, you have to believe that this is what's going on. I remember a teacher saying, well, it's obviously nothing we're doing because she's fine at school. I said, it's probably everything that you're doing, and that's why she's taking it home, because it's safe there to just kind of fling it around. You can't just sit there and say that she's fine here, so therefore it's not an issue here. Often the girls watch everything. They sometimes have quite a still little face, quite serious little people, may not be big social smilers. They are watching and they are observing all sorts of things and taking it in and learning and working out kind of what to do next. Sometimes seem rather intense, rather mature and serious kind of little people trying to systematically apply. Quite often children, and they're quite young children, you talk to them about making friends and they will say, I've been round everyone in the class to see if they will be my friend. So there's a sense of just walking up to someone and going, would you like to be my friend? No? Okay. And then moving on. So there's nothing organic about it, there's nothing kind of natural about it, it's just a process. I need to have a friend, you will do, and off you go. And again, we'll talk more about that this afternoon in terms of kind of relationships. Often the girls seek exclusivity. The friend is the special interest, the person. Just one. I just want one person in this world who is my friend. If that friend wants to play with somebody else, then she's devastated by that because she just doesn't get it. Why would you need anyone else? We have each other. It's a very intense kind of desire for a relationship, often mothered by other kids. So if anyone's looking in from the outside, she's not on her own in the playground. She's with someone else. So with a little boy who might be wandering around looking at drain pipes, we might worry about him being isolated. With the girl, she's not alone. She has friends. It's fine. Actually, the nature of that relationship might be a little bit unusual. Either one is older, one is younger, one is much more passive, one is much more controlling. We need to kind of just look a bit deeper and see what actually is happening in this relationship. Is there anything that we need to kind of worry about? One woman that I met, she tried to make friends. She picked the most popular girls she could find in her secondary school, and she said, I'm going to make friends with those people. And she plotted, she had a notebook, she was like a ninja. She had a notebook and had this kind of plan of how she was going to do it. And her cunning plan was involving stationery, because she figured that no one could resist particularly fine stationery. So she invited this whole gang of girls to come round to her house using stationery, little notes and envelopes and things, delivered it all to them. And then none of them came, not one at all came. Any of you with any empathy will now be going, oh. And she She later realised that the reason that none of them had come wasn't because they didn't like her, it's because they didn't actually know who she was at all. That she had completely misread the idea that in order to make friends with somebody, they kind of need to be vaguely within your remit, within your general social circle. Whereas these people, they didn't know her. There were hundreds of kids in this school. She was just a random other child. And that she had completely kind of missed this idea that why would someone come to your house if they don't know who you are? So there's this kind of logical, systematic effort to do something that most people do intuitively, just by organics, just by osmosis, just by kind of being around people, that you end up kind of just hanging out with them and doing stuff. So often for the autistic kids, it's how do I make friends? What do I need to do? And it's a very serious mission. And it invariably fails because it doesn't have that organic nature. It doesn't have that sense of, well, why do I like you? Why are you my friend? It's not there. And then they're very unhappy. It failed. Nobody likes me. Everybody's bullying me. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe you're just kind of going about this in a slightly unusual way, and people are kind of reacting to that in some way. So that's kind of a hard thing to think about. So the interests of the girls, again, this is something in terms of diagnosis that people often miss. Because if you say to a little autistic girl, what do you like? And she says cats, you think, oh, well, that's fairly normal and fairly typical. And it's only when you ask the right questions that you find that she can list every breed of cat in the universe, that she has 423 cats sitting on her windowsill, all in colour-coordinated order. They all have histories, names, personalities, entire backstories relating to each one of them. It's not the topic, it's the intensity that defines something from just being something you like to something that potentially, with a whole bunch of other stuff, of course, fits into this potential autistic criteria. The girls often like animate things, so animals, horses, people, celebrities, relatives, people down the road, TV shows, programs, those kind of things. And again, often have this enormous knowledge base. In traditional autism, it was all about objects, trains, dinosaurs, space, history. In female autism, it's not always about objects, it's often about people or animals of some description. Where we used to call the boys little professors, we call the girls little psychologists because they study people, they watch people. There are surprising, given the nature of empathic understanding and support, there are a surprising number of adult women who are counsellors and psychologists and vets. Because their interest has taken them into those kind of fields. We never would have thought that autistic women would become counsellors. We would have thought that that just wasn't their kind of thing. It's too much about empathy. It's too much about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's too much about kind of understanding somebody else's emotional perspective. What a lot of the women say that have got these professions is that they don't do that. They listen to the problem and they find solutions. So they're actually kind of studying this person as though they were an object almost, rather than emotionally becoming involved in the situation. They're looking at it slightly detached and saying, right, what needs to happen here? And often very effective at doing those sorts of jobs. The interests of adult women are things like crafts. There are huge numbers of craftswomen. I think that craft is female engineering. For autistic women. Asperger's syndrome used to be called engineer's disease. We've always had this sense that people on the autistic spectrum are good at the precision, the accuracy, the systemizing of objects, of materials, of data. And it seems to me, obviously a lot of women also go into data and mathematics and science, but some of them also go into craft, which again looks pretty normal. You're sitting there knitting. That's pretty normal kind of thing. What we don't know is that at home you've got 2,321 balls of wool that are all monitored, logged, data processed and on a spreadsheet. And that you know exactly how heavy each one of them is and how many stitches you need to perform your next task. Again, it's about intensity, it's about experimentation, it's about precision, and the stuff often that women come up with is really astonishing. I worked with a woman who made like purses and wallets and things, but out of tartan. She was Scottish. She knew every single thing about every single tartan that exists. So there's a depth of interest and knowledge there Rather than just that superficial, oh, I like knitting. No, it's something bigger and more precise and more special within there. But something about creating a tangible thing at the end of it. It's so common to hear girls and women talk about making stuff, baking, jewellery, card making, you name it. They love just making stuff. But that looks kind of normal, so it's just the intensity that we have to kind of worry about. In terms of this kind of restricted behaviour, again on the diagnostic criteria, some of the things that we might kind of consider to be problematic in males, we actually see as positives in girls. She's helpful, she's particular, she's a perfectionist, she stays in at break time and she tidies up all of the boxes and organises them all into colour order. How is that a problem? Actually, she's quite cleverly getting out of going into the playground at break time by appearing helpful. Because probably the playground is a nightmarish experience for her. And we see that shutdowns are much more common than meltdowns in girls. So whereas the boys go out, the girls go down and in. And so you're not really seeing any of that kind of stuff. The psychology stuff also carries on into adulthood. So quite a number of women that I meet are really into murderers and crime because it's psychology. How do people work? There's this lifelong study of trying to work out how do people work. I need to know how this is, and I'm going to study it for a very, very long time. Sensory stuff, again, we miss because all little girls like stroking softy toys or cuddling teddies, stroking your teacher's hair or, fiddling around with things. It looks kind of normal. Again, we have to ask the right questions. We have to really think about whether this is something that's categoric to autism. But it's all about our expectations of gender and how we think that this person might typically behave. The big one that's quite different is this sense of imagination that in traditional autism we said that nobody read fiction, nobody played pretend games, nobody had any imagination whatsoever. Sometimes what we see in the girls is that they will develop their own very, very complex fantasy worlds as a reason to escape from the real world. And in that fantasy world, there will be friends and characters who play the game exactly as they're supposed to. They don't break the rules. They're not rude. That nobody rejects you in any kind of way. So you can generate a whole really satisfying social world where nothing goes wrong. Whereas in the real world, you may typically find that lots of things go wrong and you just feel devastated by that. So why not just make your own? I met a young girl the other day, and she was extraordinarily black and white in her thinking. There was no way that anything could be argued that wasn't going to come back to her being right. And she was very assertive about this, very, very clear about this. And if she couldn't get an answer in the real world, she would just invent a new world in which it did make sense. So, for example, we were talking about jokes, and I said, "Do you like jokes?" And she said, "Well, sometimes jokes are just not funny." She said, "This is a joke. Why did the cow cross the road? Because he wanted to go to the movies. That is a joke," she said. I said, "Yes." I said, "But that's not really true, is it? Cows don't go to the movies, do they?" "Yes, they do," she said. I said, "Really? Have you seen a cow go to the cinema?" "Yes, they do in Mooland." And that was it. And her mother said that's what she does all of the time. So she just, and you can't argue with that. I can't argue with Mooland, can I? And this is her way forward, her desire for things to remain safe and certain and clear in that very kind of, it almost kind of felt that it was absolutely necessary for her to quickly be right, because the idea of not being right was so kind of unsettling. And we know that about autistic people, that this... The world needs to be certain, it needs to be within my understanding. If you start shaking that by going, well, actually, no, that isn't really right, is it? Then there's this huge anxiety that comes up. And for her, the way that she dealt with it was to just shut it down with a very assertive way of arguing. My boss came into the room. My boss is a clinical psychologist. And I introduced my boss and said, this is Dr. Buchan. And this girl said, "She can't be a doctor because she's not a man." And my boss said, "No, I am a doctor. You can be a doctor if you're not a man." "No, you're a nurse. You're a nurse. That's what you are. You're a nurse." "No, I'm not a nurse." "Okay, you're Mrs. Buchan then. You're Mrs. Buchan." No, I'm not Mrs. Buchan," she said. "You're Mr. Buchan. That's who you are. You're Mr. Buchan." My boss said, "No, I'm Mr. Buchan." I'd have given up with this a long time ago. They've got a lot more patience than I have. And she said, no, I'm not Mr. Buchan. My brother is called Mr. Buchan. And she said, you're married to your brother. Like the Egyptians. Because she loves horrible histories, and she established that apparently the Egyptians married their relatives. So this was a beautiful conversation of logic, where you're just trying to introduce somebody, and that didn't fit with her worldview, and she just went, try. And then she came back, you're married to your brother like an Egyptian. Fine, I'm good with that. And we were able to move on at that point. And I just find being in the presence of people's logic just astonishing. If you've got the patience for it, you just go, wow. This is just somebody just going, make it fit. And in the end, I just had to kind of not argue. You just give up at some point, I think, if it doesn't really matter, because you could just see how important it is for her for that to make sense, and it didn't, and she had to just keep trying, and she just invents stuff. Some people take on characters of animals. If they read a book, if they watch a movie, they can almost kind of take on that characteristic for a while, get completely lost in the movie and lost in the book, and become that person. Sometimes struggling a little bit to separate fact and fantasy. It's just a glorious place to be, where everything is just exciting, and in that kind of fantasy world. Don't see it so much in the boys. It very much seems to be a female thing. Finding a place to go that feels really safe and really great. And not wanting to grow up. I met a young woman about 17, and she said, I want to be a cat. And she wore ears and a tail for a cat, and she would behave like a cat. She was a very, very low body weight. She was very young for her age, very slight person. And I said, why do you want to be a cat? And she said, it doesn't matter how old you get. If you're a cat, people always look after you. When you're a human, you have to grow up and you have to look after yourself. And she was so terrified of being an adult and being alone and not having the support of people around her. She was almost kind of physically and mentally just trying to remain childlike, it felt like, in order to protect herself from that. And I find it interesting, the level of insight that some people have, that they know what they're doing to try and avoid something that feels absolutely terrifying, to have to go out there into the outside world and do that. So it's not psychosis, it's not delusion. I know that I can't avoid this, but if I just try and be a cat, maybe something will happen and people will continue to look after me. Other activities that the girls like, again, they look pretty normal. Avid readers, mad readers of just books and books. Often fiction, loving reading fiction. A lot of Lego building, a lot of collecting, a lot of sorting, lots of tidying, lots of drawing, bugs, nature, playing with things. Often solo pursuits, parallel play, colouring alongside somebody, not necessarily joining in with different sorts of games. Again, we've got to look at the depth of this stuff rather than just the surface thing. Otherwise, it often doesn't look like autism and therefore gets missed. Hans Asperger in the 1940s, he wondered why he didn't see any girls in the group that he was studying. He was studying boys, I think they were about 8 or 9 years of age. And he just briefly postured that maybe autism didn't present in girls until their teenage years. And actually, he's potentially right to some degree. For those without learning disabilities, for those without intellectual disabilities, this is really the time that autism wallops the girls really, really hard. And all the girls I interviewed for my book, all the women I interviewed for my book just said it was just awful. Suddenly, you're kind of okay, you're playing with your toys and you've got your mates and your mum or carers are organising your social life. All of a sudden, you've got to do that by yourself. All of a sudden, it's all about fashion, it's all about how you look, it's all about your personality. Female relationships are just moving backwards and forwards all the time. You're my friend, you're not my friend, she's my friend, that's not my friend. Way too complicated, and the girls just get absolutely blown by all of this. Trying to copy, but just feeling weird, not knowing what the rules of fashion are, just don't really get it, don't want to wear these clothes, they're uncomfortable, they're stupid, no value or point about any of these sorts of things. A large number of the girls seem to very much dress their own way, their own style, quite independently, quite uniquely, might be around particular patterns, particular colours, particular fabrics. A lot of autistic women seem to very much value dressing for comfort. The sensory stuff's really, really important. Not necessarily like their peers at all. The other stuff is about puberty. How do I know when it's time to wear a bra? How do I know when it's time to wear deodorant? How do I know that I need to shower every day? Brush my hair, wash my hair. They're all quite abstract things. If you don't have a big social network, it's not obvious. A lot of these things are taught, if you think about your own experiences, they're taught from your peers. If you don't have many peers, how do you know? And the sensory stuff kind of kicks in. I don't like wearing a bra because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. I don't like brushing my hair because it's painful. I can't smell myself, so therefore I don't need to have a shower. I'm too busy playing a game or doing my thing. It's another reason to get bullied. You're sticking out like a sore thumb. You look weird, you're wearing the wrong clothes, you smell, your hair's not quite right, you don't know you're supposed to clean your teeth. It's a whole bunch of stuff that I think needs to be taught incredibly explicitly to some of these girls. Nothing to do with intellect, just oblivious to the social context of these things. If you're a young woman and you're walking around without a bra, people will make negative comments towards you. People will perceive you to be a certain type of person. For a young autistic woman, that's just bizarre. Why can't I just wear what I want to wear and be comfortable? Why do I have to change how I behave because certain members of society presume that I'm a certain type of person? It just doesn't make any sense. It's hard to explain, but we need to explain some of this stuff if it's a fact, because actually this makes this person very vulnerable if they're walking around in loose clothing and people can see them. We have to explain things that you can't imagine that you'd have to explain, sometimes to somebody really clever. They're just not going to get it. You need rules, you need schedules, you need a shower every day, you need to clean your teeth every day. This is why you need to do these things. With context, with evidence, with consequences and outcomes. Otherwise, the fear is that actually this is going to be somebody even more excluded, even more bullied, because they're not picking up on the necessary social stuff. There's a book fairly recently by a woman called Robin Stewart, who's an autistic woman, about periods. There's another book by a woman called Shona Nichols, which is about bringing up teenage girls, which talks all about periods and puberty and shaving and washing and all of those kind of things. That's Robin Stewart and Shona Nichols. In terms of relationships and friendships, she's kind of blunt, she's kind of straightforward, kind of expects people to just say it like it is and be like it is. If she wants to go and have sex with somebody, she might just wander up to them and ask them openly, which obviously makes you quite vulnerable and slightly surprises the people. Neurotypical females, non-autistic females, are probably not her natural peers. She's probably more comfortable with males, gender-neutral people, probably more comfortable with other oddballs. Typically, it's my experience that oddballs find each other in the world at all ages. Primary school, the little strange children are always there together, and that's good. The worst thing we can do is think what this socially awkward young woman needs is a really popular, fashionable friend. Because there's nothing worse than standing next to that person to make you feel like the biggest useless frump in the entire world. Find her an oddbod to hang out with, and it might not be female. We shouldn't assume that women or other girls are the obvious choice. It could easily be a boy. Much more likely to be around interests. Do they like the same subjects? Do they like the same computer games? Do they like playing football together? Rather than a more kind of nuanced personality-based friendship. But as I said before, there is this kind of tendency for some of the girls to kind of aim their harpoon gun at people and go, "You will be my friend," when they haven't ever considered what the friend might be thinking about this idea. They've never considered whether the friend likes them or not. They've not picked up any signals. It's just a decision. You look nice. You have lots of My Little Ponies. I want to be your friend. Oh, actually, the other person has an opinion too, and that might not necessarily be entirely considered. Social interaction, it seems to be better when it's short, when it's focused, when it's activity-based. Any of you that are staying this afternoon, we'll talk a bit more about that. The girls particularly seem to set up these kind of personas And again, quite often girls will say, I am a different person in each setting that I go to, and they can describe that really clearly as to how they are with their friends, how they are at school, how they are at home. These cannot be kept up indefinitely. There's definitely a limit to the capacity, and after that you've got to be on your own to kind of reset before you can go back out and do it again. I think sometimes I've seen parents with good intention feeling that you've been to school all day, you're not really great at making friends, let's go to a club, let's go out, let's socialise more. If we keep putting you in places where there are lots of people, eventually you're going to make friends. And it often doesn't really work like that. Certainly 6 hours a day at school with people is probably as much as a lot of these kids want or need or can cope with. And that being at home, in your room, in your sanctuary, on your own for a while is absolutely necessary. And I know as parents we worry about that stuff, having 2 autistic kids myself, but I think it's recognising that part of that, not 100% of the time, is absolutely necessary. 6 hours a day in a school, all that change, all that sensory, all those people is way beyond the limit of most autistic people to be able to cope with. Got to have that space to keep some of that out somewhere. Also in terms of relationships and friendships, there's a whole bunch of sensory stuff, whether you can tolerate holding somebody's hand, whether you can tolerate kissing somebody, whether you can tolerate intimacy with somebody. All of those kind of things have to be taken into account. For some people it's good, for some people it's not so good. We also know that the girls, particularly, it's very rare that they are offenders. But if they are offenders around people, and their offences they commit tend to be where somebody has wronged you. So they're kind of revenge, or they're either obsessive about somebody, or where somebody has behaved in a way that you have felt that person has behaved very badly, and you feel it necessary to get payback in some way. So I think arson is a favourite autistic female crime, just so that, don't piss off an autistic woman. If you value your stuff. It's really rare, but it's that kind of thing. And that kind of makes sense. This is a very, to some degree, socially motivated person, but perhaps not with the neurotypical social skills to be able to make that work very easily. And therefore, if it goes wrong, we're back into autistic black and white world, maybe struggling for alternative perspectives, maybe struggling for alternative strategies. I just need to make this feel better. This is kind of my solution. So that there may be a kind of autistic sort of reasoning somewhere in there. Certainly from my perspective, it never occurs to me to invite someone to do something. So some people say, oh, I'm going shopping at the weekend, I'm going to go with my friend. I would never invite anyone to go shopping. I find that really bizarre. It would never even occur to me to do so. I'm just going shopping, I'll go on my own. Why would I ask someone to do it? So a lot of this kind of social stuff, it's not an avoidance of it, it's just not on the radar. It never occurs to me to tell people things. I've got a small number of friends, they're all autistic. None of us knew we were autistic when we met. I've known my friends for 20, 25 plus years, and one by one we've all got diagnoses. So we found each other kind of before all of this kind of stuff. We never randomly talk shit together, ever. We never send each other pictures of our dinner. We never send each other pictures of our shoes. We never just go, hello, how are you? If anyone did that to me, I'd be going, what do they want? What do they want? Why are they texting me? I don't know. Why are they texting me? I have no idea. They want something, and they will. So the only reason that we contact each other is to arrange something, and then we do the arrangement, and then we go out for about a couple of hours, film, don't have to talk to anybody. Food, good, usually the same restaurant, usually the same food, and then we go by. Sometimes we do a hug, but it's a bit awkward. And then we don't see each other for another 2 months, and then one of us will go, I haven't seen you for 2 months, do you want to do something? Oh yeah, go on then. And that's it. So there's nothing. Some of you are thinking, that sounds great. Your inboxes are not full of, and your WhatsApp and Facebook are not full of people going, you didn't like my post. You must hate me. We don't do any of that nonsense. It's fine. The only good stuff, so when somebody cancels on you, it's not disappointing because it means you don't have to go out the house. So I'm sure there are people in there thinking, yes, that's exactly how it feels. So although you don't like change which results in something really good and less stressful is better than no change. Of like, well, I would have liked to seen you, but it's quite fine that you're not coming. That's okay. I can deal with that. So yeah, no disappointment at all. So the adult version, we're still the little psychologist, still trying to make all of this sense work, still trying to work this stuff out. There is a huge autistic community online of all genders, but specifically autistic women on Twitter particularly. There are Facebook groups for autistic women, and they're brilliant. Autistic women are just brilliant. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? But certainly what there is, you know, we talk about empathy and autism and this nonsense about autistic people not having empathy. What autistic people have is phenomenal empathy for other autistic people, in the same way that non-autistic people have phenomenal empathy for non-autistic people, because you just share a world view. If you say something stupid, or you fall over, or you spill something down yourself, or you do a massive faux pas, or you can't cope with something because the lighting was wrong and it hurt your head, an autistic person, even if they don't share that specific experience, they will absolutely get it. They will get that discomfort. They will get the effort that it takes to do stuff that other people don't get. So there's something hugely valuable. And I think the autistic community is valuable for everybody, but I think there's a different value often for autistic women. It's just a sense of, oh my God, thank God for that, I'm not alone. The ability to laugh at yourself is huge in autistic women. We're really, really good at just going, oh my God, you won't believe what I did today. Because it happens all the time. It's not paranoia, it's absolute fact and reality. You will cock up, you will offend somebody, you will say something that's completely misconstrued, even though you didn't mean to, and be seen as a really awful person. That is going to happen most of the time that you leave the house. And if you can take that on the chin, then life's kind of okay. It's only if it bothers you that things become kind of scary. But this constantly trying to understand people. Why do they do that? I don't understand. Why do people do that? On Facebook, there's in the town that we've moved to, I love running, there's a ladies running group. And I'm thinking, wow, ladies running group. Why would I want to go running with some ladies? Why would I want to talk to anybody when I'm running? If you can talk while you're running, you're not bloody running hard enough, are you? And I see all these posts on Facebook and they're all like smiling and selfies and having a great time. I just don't understand why you need to run with another person. I just don't get it at all. So I'm genuinely baffled by it. I'm tempted to kind of go along, but I know that the effort that it would take me to try and socialise appropriately with these women would be more exhausting than the running. So I think I'm not going to go. It'd only go wrong. I'd run too fast, or I'd run too slow, or I'd insult somebody, or something would happen. It's probably not a good idea. You generally kind of... forgive me, any non-autistic women in the audience, you are the worst people in the world for me. Way too complicated, a whole different sense of agendas and things that I'm expected to respond to. Handbags, you know, people at work, people come and say, oh, I've got a new handbag. That's nice. How many pockets does it have? I've got a rucksack. I'm not so, you know, I know some autistic women, they love handbags and they love fluffy stuff and all that kind of thing, but there's just a kind of, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Once when I was at work, there was a massive crisis. I work mainly with women in one of the jobs I do. And it was a massive crisis because somebody came in and they weren't sure whether they'd put navy blue tights or black ones on that morning. And everybody had to look under different lighting to reassure her that she hadn't made the tragic faux pas of wearing navy blue instead of black tights that morning. And, you know, you can barely tell the difference. And I just kind of sat back going, and they call me disabled? I can't contribute to this. There is nothing I can say apart from get a life. And I'm sure it's really important to you, some of these things, but I'm just baffled. I'll be just grateful to have got my tights around the right way. Colour? That's a luxury I can't kind of afford. So the whole gender thing, again, I'll talk a bit more about this afternoon, is I don't don't really get gender. I don't really identify with gender. I don't feel female particularly. I choose clothes. I shop in the men's department, partly because I'm tall and got massive feet. But I shop in the men's department or the women's department. It doesn't really make any difference to me. It's much more about whether I like it, whether it's comfortable, whether it fits. Again, it's one of those things that's just not on the radar. I don't reject gender. I just don't notice it. I notice how I'm treated differently as a woman by some people. And interestingly enough, Keith and I, once you know autistic people, you spot them everywhere. Yeah, am I right? Yeah. And people always kind of go, you can't do that, but you can. You absolutely can. What I know about men is that I quite like lifting heavy objects. I'm quite a strong person. If there's something heavy to lift, I will lift it by myself. I don't need assistance. I'm tall, I'm big, I'm strong. There is no need for anyone to help me. Neurotypical men, on the whole, will help me. They will go, oh, give that ear, love, I'll take it. Always. They can't resist. It's either being kind, which I absolutely accept, or it's, oh, I can't stand here and do nothing while this feeble creature is lifting heavy things. I don't know what it is. It's good stuff. I'm not being critical at all. The other day, we in our new town, there's a chap that we've come across, and I think he's definitely autistic. He's quite strange. And he was very kind, and he took us in his van to go and pick up some wood that he was giving us for our garden. And this wood was very heavy. They were huge, massive, big, long timbers. And he didn't help me. He just stood there and didn't assist at all. And that, for me, I know it sounds like a stupid thing, but it's really interesting that an autistic person will go, you are capable of picking that up. You've picked it up. Why would I offer to help? There's no necessity for that. So there's something about gender that autistic men just don't get at all. And I was so pleased that he didn't help me. Oh dear, that's my weird existence. So generally, in terms of other people, often autistic women often say, and I have this all the time, people think I'm stuck up, people think I'm aloof, people think I'm standoffish, that I am not friendly because I'm not an overly smiley person. If I walk into a new situation, into a meeting or a party, I will stand on the edge and I will watch. I will watch where I need to sit because the lighting will upset me, or whether the chair is going to be okay for me because I've got problems with my kidneys. I'm sussing it all out. Who do I need to be with? Where can I go? Can I get to the back? Where's the door? How is this going to be? And so I end up looking very serious. And women say this all the time, that people are always saying, smile, it might never happen, that they're intense, that they're serious. And what they say is that inside, they're just thinking about unicorns and skipping up escalators and running around and doing really stupidly childish stuff. But on the outside is this really unapproachable looking woman. And that very much seems to be a thing. One of the things that I haven't mentioned that seems to be very much a case with the girls and is a consequence of all of this masking, this camouflaging, this mimicking, this copying, is that on the whole, I think we see a lot more mental health stuff in the girls than we do in the boys who don't do it. So if you're able to just say, nope, I'm going to be me, I'm going to do my thing, I'm not going to try, I'm not going to attempt to fit in, everything's fine, I'm just being myself, you can protect yourself to some degree from some of this stuff, whereas a lot of the girls seem to end up with lots and lots of bad mental health stuff, and often from quite an early age, because the effort of bending so far to be someone that you're not takes its toll on your mind and then takes its toll on your body. So what we see in autistic people, definitely from my experience more so than the girls, are a whole bunch of aches and pains, often considered to be hypochondriacs. Your eyes hurt, your head hurts, your limbs hurt, you're blinking, you're uncomfortable in some kind of way. And you know, I've had parents who've just dismiss this stuff. They've taken their kid to the doctor, no cause has been found, and they've just said, oh, for goodness sake, just get on with it. And then just felt terrible years later when it's become apparent that this was all some kind of stress-related stuff. So things like tinnitus, vertigo, migraines, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ME, colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, all sorts of kind of physical conditions which have a large stress component are really anecdotally, there's not been any research on this, anecdotally common in girls. Chemical sensitivities, perfumes, air conditioning, sensory discomfort with lots and lots of things. So we need to kind of watch out for this. They're not part of the diagnostic criteria, but if you're seeing girls that are picking up some of this stuff and then there's this other impact going on, we really kind of need to not ignore that and think about that it's not just the physical stuff we need to deal with, it's looking at the root of that. So where's the stress? How do we look after her better in order that some of these things will go away? Because if you just medicate for this physical stuff, it's not going to go away if it's you know, cause is a stress-related kind of a thing. So finally, our general kind of support. Looking beyond the surface presentation, she might need a lot more support than you think she does, because she's doing such an amazing job to hide it. Definitely considering autism as a possibility in diagnosis, even if everybody else around you is going, no, don't be silly. There's some really good resources. Scottish Autism have a programme called the Right Click programme for women and girls, which has loads of really good videos. The National Autistic Society has a clinicians module for women and girls, which up until recently has been free. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but it was. Got Curly Hair Project here with resources, books and comic strips and things. Quite a lot of information, lots of people blogging, autistic women blogging, lots of people talking about their experiences on YouTube. Limpsfield Grange, some of you might be aware of, is a school in Surrey which is all for autistic girls. They've written a couple of fiction books with an autistic female main character. They've also got lots of, they're on a TV show, they're on YouTube, and the teenage girls, they're just brilliant. Their acceptance of themselves as autistic young women is just amazing. It's something that I'm in awe of, not having had that, coming to this all kind of much later in life. Really important to teach these girls not to compare themselves to their neurotypical non-autistic female peers, because what they're comparing is social skills. They're not comparing how good they are at making stuff or building stuff or learning stuff or reading stuff or knowing stuff. They are comparing themselves to somebody who is on a completely different planet socially, and that is only going to make you feel worse about yourself. You need autistic peers. There's lots of young women like Alice from the Curly Hair Project who are good role models, people who get it, who are sharing the world in the same way that you are. The finding of your tribe is really important. Another thing that the girls often really struggle with is not asking for help, because asking for help means you failed because you can't do it. So we've really got to keep an eye on these girls, particularly in school, particularly with their mental health, to make sure that the help is given, even if they just go, no, I'm fine, I don't need it. Because in autism world, that potentially looks like failure. They become so proficient at being invisible that nobody believes that they need the kind of support that they need. The big message, I guess, is that what we need to do for these girls at a really young age is just tell them you're fine as you are. And that's it, really, that you're not inadequate, you're not anything less than you need to be. You are absolutely fine as you are.